Commander Nick Blaine and High Commander Joseph Lawrence both pass away in the 9th episode of the 6th season of The Handmaid's Tale, which is one of the most significant episodes of the show to date. Additionally, it is one of the most tragic character deaths in the entire series. It was anticipated that the aftermath of the events that transpired during Serena Joy's wedding to High Commander Gabriel Wharton, which included the presence of sedatives in her cake and a plan to eliminate a significant number of Boston's commanders, would result in swift retribution. However, the fact that 2 longtime members of The Handmaid's Tale's cast, in addition to Wharton himself, were eliminated was still a shocking conclusion. The conclusion of the 9th episode of the 6th season of The Handmaid's Tale did not include either Nick or Lawrence's involvement, as this was not part of the original plan for America. Before Rose drove him into joining her father, Commander Wharton, and fighting for her and their son, the former was initially in the hospital with his wife, Rose. However, she eventually convinced him to get involved. Lawrence's situation was a much more painful coincidence, as the commanders arrived early and pushed him into a corner. This meant that he had to involve himself in the plans to blow them all up, and that is exactly what he did in the penultimate episode of the 6th season of The Handmaid's Tale. We never see a body in The Handmaid's Tale, and if that's the case on television, there's a golden rule that it indicates the person could still be alive. Technically speaking, The Handmaid's Tale does not overtly show that Nick or Lawrence has passed away. This is not the case at all. This is not a sitcom. There is no doubt about whether Nick got off the plane, and there is no way that he could have survived that explosion. There is no way that these things could have happened. Nick, Lawrence, and Wharton, along with the other commanders who were traveling to Washington, D.C., have all been killed, and June is shown watching with tears as the jet transforms into a ball of fire in the sky. Considering that Lawrence had a more intimate relationship with Nick, and at least had a better understanding of his convoluted nature, the fact that Nick was added to the list of passengers on the plane could have made things a little bit more difficult for him. On the other hand, it was not quite enough to stop him from carrying out the plan. There was no backtracking, and there was no way to get out of it. For the love that Lawrence had for his daughter and the love that he had for his late wife, Eleanor, he had to make the decision to be on the right side, and he had to make that decision clearly and finally. In addition to his own demise, Nick's was also a consequence of this. Would it have been possible to foresee Nick's destiny? June remained mute as she saw him board the plane, and given that she was aware of the other things that were in store for him, she could have, in principle, attempted to shout out to him. On the other hand, that would not have been merely a cheap way out for the storyline of the show. Rather, it would not have been appropriate for either of the characters at this point in time. June most likely still has feelings for Nick, at least on some level. Irrespective of what he did, those emotions do not simply go overnight. It is never as straightforward as that. Nevertheless, she is essentially incapable of trusting him. If she were to make an effort to save him, there is no assurance that he would assist them in escaping the predicament. Nor is there any assurance that he would choose to go against Gilead at that point in time. He has already made his decision, and there is no longer any opportunity for him to return. Considering that June had just witnessed Lawrence make the ultimate sacrifice in order to contribute to the creation of a better world for people he loves, there was no way that she could have allowed any lingering sentiments for Nick to hinder her decision-making process. However, the risk that it carries is even more significant than that. There was a possibility that June was heard by the other commanders, or that Nick's driver identified her and informed them of her presence. The only opportunity to eliminate a number of high-ranking commanders and launch another massive attack against Gilead was being presented at this moment. Considering that June had just witnessed Lawrence make the ultimate sacrifice in order to contribute to the creation of a better world for people he loves, there was no way that she could have allowed any lingering sentiments for Nick to hinder her decision-making process. In the end, June was the focal point of Nick's story, as it was destined to be. The very core of his conclusion was the woman whom he had saved and been saved by throughout the course of the play, and whom he had loved and lost several times throughout the course of the show. Not only did he talk about her in his last chat with Lawrence, but he also emphasized how accurate she was. According to her, I should give up all of this. I was informed by her. numerous times. You should have listened to her. It is true that Nick ought to have given up everything and should have paid attention to what June had to say. On the other hand, I had always had the impression that Nick's fate was to pass away in Gilead. However, this fate is actually a stronger payoff because it strikes to the duality of Nick. The kind, decent man who loved and saved June, and the scared kid who couldn't go against the men who ruled him. I must admit that prior to just a few episodes ago, I absolutely thought that would be saving June and/or Hannah. However, this fate is actually a stronger payoff. Despite the fact that Lawrence's story is a more tragic one, Nick's story is a tragic one, but it was the appropriate choice for The Handmaid's Tale. A joyful ending for him would not have felt true to the narrative in any way, and it is cleaner to have him removed from the equation totally, especially considering that the testaments are on the horizon. Furthermore, despite the fact that he might not have been able to turn against Gilead, his death, along with the deaths of the others, might be able to bring everything to an end. Is death the price that sin must pay? This is exactly what you said, Wharton. Joseph Lawrence, an economist, a loving father, a freedom fighter, and a part-time James Bond, was responsible for the sparkling firework of a death that was the result of the commander's faults in the film Execution. "Guess you decided to join the winners," Nick yelled out to the crowd just before they were all blasted into bite-sized slices of barbecue. Talk about putting the arrogance of the bad in its proper place. Lawrence and his Mayday bomb lowered the entire plane around 30,000 feet lower than planned, guaranteeing that his headstone would read anything other than, "Designed Gilead, good at sarcasm." At the same time, there were cries for cigars among the passengers. During this penultimate episode, the most memorable moment was when Lawrence made a selfless sacrifice. There is no way that anyone could have ever imagined that the noose would actually tighten around June's neck so near to the conclusion of the story. This makes the scene on the scaffolding considerably more pedestrian than its dramatic tone suggested it would be. As a result of the fact that Ann Dowd's Aunt Lydia already had a job lined up in the sequel series, The Testaments, the rope has effectively been removed from around her neck even before Mayday arrived. You, Janine Moira, it was inevitable that they would all find a way out of it, which is a sentiment that has been the curse of this program for several seasons now. Every arrest, every blocked escape route, and every cage we have been able to wait through with composure, rather than holding our breath in fear that this would be the time that we lose someone significant. It is impossible for us to do so, since The Handmaid's Tale is overly protective of its primary characters. This is an absurd thing to say when one considers the ordeals that this novel has required them to endure. What were the lyrics to the song by Taylor Swift that was used as the background music for the opening scenes of this week? "From the depths of death I arose. Each and every time I do it." Those lyrics may have been the theme song for this show. Certainly, it belongs to June. At long last, however, we have suffered the loss of a colleague. Two different people. The work that was done in this final season to explain the inner workings of Joseph Lawrence and Nick Blaine paid off handsomely, and they will not be returning for the sequel. Nick, who has taken his decision and must now live, or rather not live, with it, is not someone who I feel any emotion toward, in contrast to June. In the aftermath of his betrayal by Jezebels and the subsequent "Forget it, Rita, it's Chinatown" moment, we came to the realization that Nick was not a heroic double agent, but rather a lost child who had compromised his principles in order to ensure his own life. Let's take a peek at how great that turned out. I was mentally guiding June up those steps with a joyful "bye," even though he may have been howling in silence as he climbed those steps into the jet. In contrast, Lawrence was in pain. During this season, there has not been sufficient screen time to establish his salvation via love of a child storyline. Yet, the little that we have seen has been successful. Joseph making peace with tiny Angela, whose future he must have been imagining when he made the decision to join Wharton and the others onto that plane, has been a wonderful conclusion for a character who has been complicated throughout the story. It is for a good reason that the surly, sarcastic loner melting under the full-beam devotion of a child is a storytelling classic And this particular instance provided us with the wonderful parting scene with his copy of The Little Princess, the moment when Naomi accepted Lawrence's request to disregard one of Gilead's obscene decrees and to educate their stolen child to read. She gave the impression that she was human for a fraction of a second. By the time Lawrence, who had been taken aback by the early arrival of the other commanders, took his courageous decision and paused for a moment to place his palm on his breast. As a sign of farewell to June, I was feeling well-fed. The conclusion of Lawrence's story placed him squarely on the one of us side, which he had been questioning for years about the moral standing of this bright but terrible mind. According to June, the location of the place where the twice-widowed Serena resides has also been fixed. Like Lawrence, Serena gave up the commanders in order to make up for the wrongs she had committed in the past. However, what is more important is that she did it in order to fulfill the love-centered theme of this episode. As an alternative to vengeance, June strongly encouraged Wharton to go with this option. On the subject of the world that they both want for their children, June pleaded with Serena to give her that world.